Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. We are going to continue with what we've been learning. We are 2 lessons into our beginner materials, and we will be continuing with lesson 3 today in our Japanese basics. And last time we talked about the no, the possessive particle, which we use to, add extra information to our nouns. And we're going to continue on with that, taking the nouns that we have and making them a bit more colorful, a bit more interesting. And before that, I want to circle back to the sentence structure that we've been using. Does anyone remember what it is? It's that basic sentence structure that, we keep coming back to. It seems simple, but we can expand it out and out to make it more useful, more expressive. A wa B does. Thank you. So we're sticking with that. And as you'll now see, before, we said A and B are the same. It's taking A and saying, hey, A is B. They're the same thing. They refer to the same thing. And as you note, we didn't put nouns in there. We didn't say N wa N, des. Because with that, it's a bit restrictive. Instead, we're going to look at A and B as things that might be one word, they might be 2 words, they might be 7 words later on down the line, but they're elements. They have a noun at their core, but they might have some extra stuff, adding to it. And let's take a look at the basics lesson for adjectives. Now, Japanese adjectives are not particularly confusing, but there's a few things that we're going to look at, some things that are new to you, possibly, when you're comparing them to adjectives in English or another language. But there are a few things that, you'll recognize. You'll say, oh, this is the same as English. Some things that are different. Now, the biggest change is that there are 2 types of adjectives. Generally speaking, there's some real special ones that we won't get into today, but more or less, there are 2 types. There are e-adjectives and there are na-adjectives. And somewhat confusingly, these don't refer to the same thing. What makes an e-adjective and what makes a na-adjective, they're not the same rules. So let's talk about what these 2 categories are. And unfortunately, you're going to find out that there is not a clean rule that can cover every single adjective. And so you cannot necessarily look at an adjective and say in all cases, oh, this is an e-adjective or this is a na-adjective. But let's go ahead and get started, and I'll give you some examples. They are named, now this is somewhat misleading. It makes sense now, and then we'll see how it breaks down in a few minutes. They're named for the last character when they attach to nouns, and that is correct. That is correct, but at the same time, it's not quite correct, and we'll see. So let's look at e-adjectives first. It does refer, with the e-adjectives, these are a bit easier because they all end in e. The e character will be the last character in an e-adjective. And so I'm going to give you a few examples. We've got the one that everyone knows. We have kawaii, which is cute. We have the one that if you're a beginning learner, you'll probably mix these up at some point and get someone angry at you. We have kowai, which is what? What does kawaii mean? Does anyone know? It means scary, yes. So we've got kawaii, which is scary, and we have kawaii, which is cute. But, when you're first learning, those things get mixed together, and you might say one instead of the other. We also have a few more of the basic ones. We have takai, which can mean tall. It can also mean expensive when referring to goods, products and whatnot. We have oki, which means large. We have chisai, which means small, and many others. But what I want you to see is that these all end in e. Now, not everything that ends in e is an e-adjective, but most of them are. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. So, e-adjectives generally, they always end in e. Now, let's look at them a bit, and then we'll talk about We'll talk about the na-adjectives afterwards. So looking at this, adjectives in Japanese, they are really nice because they fall into the same spot that adjectives in English do. Up until now, we've only really looked at one verb. We've looked at des, but already we saw a break with what we typically see in in English sentences. Whereas in an English sentence, the verb might come somewhere in the middle, whereas in a Japanese sentence, they always come at the end. And with the adjectives, though, the rules are the same. The adjectives will come right in front of the noun that they're describing. And as I noted, chisai means small. So I don't know why you would be describing a book as small or large. We usually don't say, hey, look at that small book over there. We talk about the colorful book or the interesting book. But I guess you could be describing a small book. And if that's the case, you would say, chisai hon. And the e-adjectives are really nice in that they require less changes. And we'll see what I mean by changes, but they're very easy to just drop right in front of a noun, and that's all there is to it. And so let's take a look at this. We have chisai hon, small book. Chisai, the adjectives first, and then hon comes after that. Now let's real quickly think about what are other, now I know some of you are beginners, so you might not have a ton of vocabulary, that you can dig into, but what are some other words that you can think of? What are other physical objects we can use and stick after chisai? We have small book, we have, we might have inu, a small dog. I just stuck up a small cat, chisai neko. What else? What else can you think of? Feel free to type it out into the channel if you have an idea. Small what? What are some other things we can stick in there? Yeah, we could say a small store. If it's physically small, there's a gigantic store, and then right next to it, there's kind of a mom and pop store that's really small. We could be talking about people. We usually don't, I'd say in English, we probably don't use that. The grammar's fine, but we might not say, look at that small person over there. We typically refer to height, I think. There's a tall person over there. But especially with kids, we might say, oh, there's a small child. Look at that small child over there. Cars, sure. Pens, toys. So what everyone's putting into the channel, those look great. So that's all you have to do with e-adjectives. Now let's take a look at a bit more. So if we're flipping it around, and we do big, it's oki that I mentioned before. Again, the adjective ends in e, and all you have to do is stick it right in front of the noun to have it work. So we have a small book, we have a large book, we have a cute dog, and again, the word order is exactly the same. It makes it pretty nice. So before we continue, let's practice with this a little bit more. I gave you a whole bunch of adjectives earlier, and I'll mention them again one more time. We have chisai, which is small. We have oki, which is big. Takai, it has a few meanings, but let's stick with the expensive one. We can also do colors. There's a bunch of color adjectives that end in e. We have aoi, which is blue. We have akai, which is red. And we have, let's go back to the kawaii, which is cute. Now, let's take the sentence structure that we were using before. Let's practice using these. So we have the awa bides structure that we had. And I'm going to introduce a new word. You might know this, but just a word that we haven't done in the lessons yet. We're going to use kore. Kore means this. It's something you're referring to that's right in front of you. And if we stick that in the first spot, we have a sentence like this. So say you're introducing something. You might be a teacher, like myself, in front of the students and saying, students, this is a so-and-so. And instead of the be, we had just nouns there, but let's drop in a noun and an adjective. So let's pretend that it's show and tell. We're all in class and we brought some object. It might be a building, it might be a book. It doesn't necessarily have to be something you could actually carry into a classroom. And let's use a single, let's keep them simple. Let's use a single adjective and then a noun. So please introduce something. It doesn't have to be something you actually have. So amazingly, the first two people both talked about apples. One person called it a sweet apple, amai ringo. One person used a red apple. And don't forget, this is a beginner class, so although we have people using kanji, and that's totally okay, if you do use kanji, I would recommend sticking the hiragana next to it. But if you see some kanji and you don't know what it is, you can always use the little kalchan with the question mark to have kalchan tell you what, how to read that. But yeah, I'll give you about a minute for people to type out their answers. Don't worry about making mistakes. As I tell my son, who is 6, he doesn't believe me. One day he will. Mistakes are the best way to learn something. You remember mistakes because, they tend to be, it might just be a split second, but there's some embarrassment. It's like, oh, I made a mistake. I was wrong. But even negative emotions, I wouldn't say, let's make everything negative, but overly positive emotions, negative emotions, those are the ones that stick around. And so mistakes are a good way of taking, a little snippet of embarrassment and using that to solidify that concept in your head. And it looks like everyone's generally sticking to those e-adjectives. It's looking good. And I'll give you about 10 more seconds, and then we will continue on with the next category. But for those of you that, if it's your first lesson with us, just know that you're not required to, put any of these out. It's if you want to practice, you can, but I hope you do. It's a good chance to do it, and you're not standing up in front of a class. There's no eyeballs on you looking at you as you answer. All right, let's keep going. So, as I said earlier, there are 2 adjective types. There's the e-adjectives and there's the na-adjectives. I feel like the na ones are a smidge more confusing, and so that's why we cover them next, but let's go ahead and jump into them. Now, the example on the screen, we're going to put that on hold for a second, but let's talk about na-adjectives. So here are the rules that I'm going to give you. These rules, like most rules in Japanese, as you will learn, there are very few rules that apply to every single Japanese situation when we're talking about grammar. There are times where, this works 99% of the time, but there's always that special case. And so what I say is, with a lot of things, especially adjectives, you just have to remember the adjectives. And you have to remember, is this a na-adjective? Is this an e-adjective? But if you don't remember, these rules will help you 99% of the time. If you don't know, use these to guess, and you're generally safe. But an e-adjective, as I'm typing out in the channel, an e-adjective ends in e. Now, a na-adjective, surprisingly, doesn't end in e. But note how I'm saying it doesn't end in na, and you'll see why. So if you're looking at adjectives and you see one that ends in an e, chances are it's an e-adjective. If it's any other character, and there's a bunch, I'll give you some examples. For example, genki. It's that word that is surprisingly easy to understand, but at the same time, it's kind of hard to translate into English. It means kind of energetic. It can just mean a general state of good health. It just means that you're doing well. But genki is one. So Danny, yes, it doesn't necessarily, well, an e-adjective is always going to end in e. It will always end in e. A na-adjective usually doesn't end in E. And so I'll make a small correction to what I typed up there. These two rules are, if you don't know any better, use these. If you don't know any better, use these. But let me get back to some examples. So we have Genki. Oh, there we go. Let me try using the hiragana, which means, among other things, energetic. We have Shizuka, which means quiet. We have, and here's one example. We have kirei, which means it can mean clean. For example, a clean room. It can also mean beautiful. And it has an E on the end of it. And these do happen. But generally speaking, the na-adjectives don't end in E. It's a na-adjective, but it ends in E. The number of those is so low that you don't have to worry about, memorizing them as a list. It's just they come up and you'll say, oh, that's a different one. And the ones we use every day, there's not too many of them. Now, let me make a note that if you're using a textbook or you're in a class, you might see the textbook or you might see the teacher write it a different way. And so with that in mind, let's look at what's on the screen. And we're going to use this example, shizuka na hito, a quiet person. Now, already you might be thinking, but Michael, just a minute ago, you said shizuka is quiet. And what's this na? What's this na doing here? If you remember one of the first panels that we had, I said that the e and the na are used to refer to the character that is between or part of the adjective and then the noun that comes after it. And so here's where things get a smidge more confusing. Na-adjectives use a na in order to connect to a verb. However, the na is not actually part of the word. So let's take all that and let's put that into practice. Let's look at what we have. So shizuka. Shizuka means quiet. It can be used to refer to, say, a quiet person. It can be a quiet room. It's a nice word. And the word itself is shizuka. However, depending on the material, you might, I believe the Genki textbooks use this. And it's not a suffix. No, it's not a suffix. Sometimes you'll see it written this way. It'll look like this. Shizuka, and then in parentheses, na. What this is doing is it's helping identify it as a na-adjective for you. This is also a common way of using it. Now, technically, this is not the case, but this is the way I like to explain na. Na is glue. Na is the glue between the na-adjective and the noun. Na is the glue between the na-adjective and the noun, excuse me. So if you've got shizuka, you have na, which is glue, and then you have the noun. It's hooking them together. Every time you have a na-adjective and you have a noun, you need that na in between. It has to come in there. It's not that if you're speaking casual Japanese, you can drop it out. No. With na-adjectives, you need the na. If there's a noun coming afterwards, you need to stick it in there to hook it in. So, with the example on the screen, we have shizuka na hito. Shizuka na hito. And this works with all na-adjectives. I'm just going to swap that out a bit. So we have shizuka na hito. That works. We could have the other ones I gave you. We have genki na hito. Kirei na hito. All na-adjectives. So we have quiet person, we have an energetic person, we have a beautiful person. Shizuka na hito, genki na hito, kirei na hito. They all need the na. This is a rule, that you can't break. It's just there. And let's look at some more examples. But keep in mind that the na, when you remember it, and this is the way renshuu does it. When you remember it, you want to remember it as shizuka, as genki, as kirei. And kuroneko, your question will be answered. We're going to get to that really soon. It's an excellent question. But if you remember it with the na, so if you're studying to yourself and you say, what's quiet? Quiet is shizuka na. And what is energetic? Oh, that's genki na. And what is clean? Oh, that's kirei na. It's going to hinder you later on. And you'll see in just a few minutes why that's the case. I would highly recommend you remember it as shizuka, as genki, as kirei. And then in your head think, oh, that's a na-adjective. So let's see a few more examples. And you'll see, what I'm saying. So here's another example. Genki na gakusei. An energetic student. Or, we have a kirei na heya. A pretty room, a beautiful room. Interestingly, this one could be a clean room, depending on the context. Kirei is a very common word, and it's strange that it has those two meanings that are often, they can often be used to represent the same thing. A beautiful room or a pretty room is usually a clean room, but they do have these two separate meanings. So let's practice this a little bit, and then we will continue on, with slightly larger sentences. So remember, if we have a na-adjective, you need that na as the glue. And that's the word I want you to remember. It's kind of a weird way to refer to it, but that's what's going to stick in your head, is glue. Na-adjective, you need the na, and then you have the noun. So let's talk about, which one should we use? Let's use kirei, because let's keep things positive. Can you think of something that you would refer to as pretty, as beautiful, or as clean? And I have recently gotten into collecting rocks from outside. So I might see something and say, oh, kirei na ishi. Wow, that's a pretty rock. So what else do you think? What other examples? People are talking about, cats, water, cakes, flowers. Yeah, flower definitely comes up. Yuya is using keshiki, which is kind of the landscape, the surroundings. But yeah, these are good examples. Now, let's stop. And I actually should have done this a second ago, but let's keep practicing, but let's make it just a bit bigger. Let's make it just a bit bigger. Now before, we had that e wa bi desu. And let's keep going with the, with the example that we had before. And let's say we are using kore. And actually, let's switch off with kore because, we already learned that. Let's put another word in its place. Let's use sore. What's the difference between kore and sore? Kore is something that is near you. In English, that would be the this. Sore is closer to something that's a bit further away from you, that. So instead of showing something to everyone in the class, let's say you're pointing something out to someone else. You say, oh, look over there. That is a pretty so-and-so. So if you don't want to think of something new, use the example that you put up just a minute or two ago and try this sentence out. Let's use our na-adjectives. And I'm going to cheat and did what I did before. それはきれいな石です. That's a pretty rock. Let's pick that up. Let's bring that up. So let's see what examples you have. We have people talking about birds, about trains, characters, trees. I would say, generally speaking, bathrooms in Japan are cleaner than the bathrooms I remember back in the US, but it's, you still have a lot of variance depending on where you're going. So it might be that you say, wow, this bathroom is beautiful. And you might be wondering, why am I speaking about bathrooms when someone earlier mentioned toire? And this is something that surprised me when I first came to Japan. You wouldn't say in English, can I use the toilet? Can I go to the toilet? You'd say, can I go to the restroom? Can I go to the bathroom? And in Japanese, it's okay to say toire. It can mean the physical toilet that that you might be sitting down on, but it can also be used to refer to the bathroom in general. So if someone says in class, even in polite speech, can I go to the bathroom? They would probably use toire. So that's not strange. It shocked me when I first got there. So let's jump back to the screen that's in front of us. Now the example here, it goes back to what we were using before, but we already practiced this, so let's just review it. Chisho wa okii hon desu. This is our e-adjective, right? And with our e-adjective, those are the nice ones because we just drop those right in front of the noun. So here we have a dictionary is a big book. This is a common phrase that you'll use every day. Hey, dictionaries are big books, but it's there for you. Now, again, with those na-adjectives, the na is, what is it? I'm going to drill this into your heads. What do we consider the na? What's its job? What's that na doing? Anyone? It's the glue, and the glue comes between what and what? The na is used for two specific things, the adjective and the noun. Please do not use Gorilla Glue on your adjectives. You will never be able to take them off. So I want you to focus on it being linked between the adjective and noun, and you'll see why. You'll see why in just a second. Now, again, let's go back to our ewa bides sentence. And again, what's be? Be is not necessarily a noun. It's just something that we're sticking in there. And just like before, we can replace it, and let's try that. Now here, we've been using, a combination. We said a beautiful flower, a pretty room, a beautiful bridge, a pretty, person. But you're free to just drop that if you want and just have that adjective in its place. And so here we have jisho wa okii desu. Now, again, the e-adjectives are nice. You don't have to do anything special. But take a look at what's coming up next. Kanojo wa shizuka desu. There's no na. Why? The na is the glue, but don't think, oh, I need to stick it to that na adjective all the time. It only is needed when it's coming before a noun. And des is not a noun. It's, it acts in some senses as a verb. That's why it's really beneficial to remember the na adjectives without the na. Even though some textbooks do it, and I know why they do it, I feel like it's better to remember it as shizuka, as genki, as kirei, because that way you're not thinking, oh, in this situation, I need to remove the na. And as we learn more and more forms, we'll find out that na is used less and less. So it's just this one situation where, where the na comes up. So if there's no noun coming after it, there's no na. No noun, no na. Just keep that in your head. It sounds silly, but next week we're having a discussion on how to, how to study well, how to learn well. And part of that is being silly or making things that sound like something a child would say, because those are the things that make us laugh or make us roll our eyes and say, oh, that's foolish. But those are the things that we remember. So if there's no noun, there's no na. So let's practice this a little bit more. And let's talk about, I'm going to give you some examples. I'm going to give you a sentence, and please fill in the blank with whatever you think works for you. Okay? Feel free to use e-adjectives. Feel free to use na-adjectives. Whatever works well. And before that, let's make a list. Some of you have been studying for a week. Some of you have been studying for a few years. And let's get a list together. So first, let's make a list of all the e-adjectives we can think of. Now, before you type, let me put down some rules. If you put in something, please make sure the hiragana is there. So I'm going to give you an example. If you want to put the kanji, that's fine. But please make sure the hiragana is next to it. And please put the English next to it as well. Because for some of these, it might be a new word that someone else doesn't know. This is the chance for them to pick that up. So, put the word, put the English next to it. If you're using kanji, you don't have to. But if you're using kanji, put the hiragana next to it. And I'm going to give you about a minute. And let's see how many e-adjectives we can come up with. Okay? Good luck. So we have yasashi, which is kind, yasui, which is cheap. Interestingly, yasui, cheap, in English, when we say cheap, it sometimes carries a negative connotation, and that's the same in Japanese, but not necessarily. So yasui, you might want to translate it as cheap or inexpensive. Usually you think of inexpensive as a good thing, and so yasui can carry a positive or negative connotation. So we've got isogashi is busy, kanashi is sad, fukai is deep. Sabishi is lonely. Furui is old. Be careful. That's kind of a dangerous word because it's only used for objects, for things, not for living things. So if you call a person furui, you might get slapped upside the head. So furui is old for objects. Usually with people, there's other words that you can use, and one of the ones I'll just mention it now is toshiori. But it's something that you usually don't say too directly in English, but in Japanese, sorry. But definitely don't use furui if you're talking about people. Yuya, your atarashi, for new, it's got one too many E's. Just a single E. I'll give you about 15 more seconds, and then we're going to switch over to our na-adjective list. Okay, let's wrap it up. So if you're typing, feel free to finish typing, type out your answer. But let's go ahead and open it up to na-adjectives. So remember, na-adjective is, if it's not ending with E, it's definitely a na-adjective, as well as a few of those ones that do end in E. But what are the na-adjectives that you can think of? Same format. Just put the word out, put the English next to it. Kantan, easy. Hopefully what you're thinking about today's lesson. Shizuka is quiet. Kirai is disliked. Sometimes it can mean hate. Kaiteki, yeah, worldwide. Shinsetsu is kind. Healthy, yeah, healthy, energetic. Yume, oh, that's a good one. Again, it ends with an E, but it's a na-adjective. Tanjun does can mean simple, but keep in mind that most often the one that people will use is kantan if they mean simple in terms of difficulty. You know, is this easy or is this hard to do? Okay, I'll give you about 15 more seconds and then we'll jump into some practicing. That's looking good so far. Okay, looking good. All right. Let's jump into some practicing. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a sentence with one word missing. It might be a noun, it might be an adjective, and there's not a single word that fits into that spot. There could be 10, there could be 100 words. And I just want you to think of a word that you feel could fit in there and drop it in there. Okay? At the beginning, we'll stick to adjectives. So I want an adjective to go into that spot, and I'll give you 15, 20 seconds. And let's see how many adjectives we can find that go into, go into that spot. Okay? Let's begin. Kao-chan, our mascot, Renshu's mascot. Kao-chan wa, no, this. So you just need to put the word. Doesn't have to be the full sentence. Dani chisai. It's one of those weird ones where it's got an e after the chi. Chisai. Chisai. All right, I'm gonna keep going. Nani nani wa oishii desu. Nani nani is a term that Japanese people use when they're referring to, say, a blank in a sentence that needs to be filled in. So sushi's good, pizza's good. Demi seems to think kalchan is edible. I worry about that. We have soup, we have ramen. Ramen has a dash after the ra. Ramen. Okay, let's try this one. Okaasan wa nani nani hito desu. Now be careful, there's a noun there, so depending on what word you use, you may need to add something else. Shinsetsu na, kirei na, yasashi and tsioi are both e-adjectives, so you don't need the na. So it's not yasashi na, it's yasashi, it's tsioi. Remember, na only comes after those na-adjectives. Only comes after the na-adjectives. Rihito is referring to the height, which interestingly is a complex thing to say in Japanese. But rihito, whenever you're doing height, it's either takai, which is tall, or hikui for short, not chisai. So se ga hikui means short. Okay, I see everyone, you're doing really well. I see those na's getting stuck to the na adjectives, and I see nothing getting stuck to the e adjectives. All right, let's try this. Nani nani wa hayai doubutsu desu. Doubutsu means animal. Hayai, I don't think it was in the list earlier, but hayai is fast or early. But we're probably not talking about early, so let's go with fast. Looking good, looking good. Lots of animals. And let's try one more. Nani nani wa takai desu. And let's go with the expensive version of that word, not the tall or high, rather. Renshuu's not that expensive. I don't think so. It's not too bad. And you can use it for free for as long as you want. So let's say we've got watches are expensive, houses are expensive, computers, games, especially if it's a Nintendo game that never goes on sale. Cars, kuruma, sure. Niku, especially depending on the country. Yeah, niku, meat can be very expensive. In Japan, beef is particularly expensive. It's quite hard to find beef in stores, actually, depending on the type of beef that you're looking for. One thing that might surprise you, depending on the country you come from, if you come to live in Japan, is that minced or diced, the minced meat, that you might, if say you were making a hamburger, you would typically use beef in many countries. And in Japan, it is really hard to find minced beef. So the best that you can do in many stores is that it's a mix between pork and beef. So it might be a 70-30% or 60-40%, mostly pork with a little bit of beef mixed in. But yes, beef is expensive in Japan. Okay, so we're about to wrap things up, but I wanted to practice just a little bit more. Let's review real fast. With e-adjectives, all we have to do is stick them in front of the noun. Just have to put them in front of the noun. Na-adjectives need that glue that needs the na if it's going in front of a noun. Otherwise, you do not need it. So, looking at the screen, just to review, if you say kanojo wa shizuka desu, she's quiet, there's no noun there coming after it, so there's no na. No noun, no na. However, if you were to, rewrite that and say, quiet her, or quiet woman, shizuka na hito, shizuka na kanojo, then you need that na. And so that's why you see the na in parentheses sometimes. It's to let you know, hey, you're often going to see this na coming afterwards, but it's not a guarantee. So to wrap things up today, let's go back to, and this is one of those things that if you ever come to Japan or you study here, you live here, you will have to do no less than 1,000,000 times, which is a self-introduction. And it's one of those things that when you first have to do it, you're trying to think, what do I say? What do I say about myself? And so let's build up a set of sentences we could possibly use. And we have a bit of flexibility here. You probably wouldn't refer to yourself using this sometimes because it feels a bit simple, but this is an excellent way to jump in. So think about yourself and what's something you could use to describe yourself. We're going to need, and let's try using the noun and the adjective because that's a bit more complex. So in my case, I am going to say this. My kids would definitely agree that I'm a strange person. 私はおかしい人です. Hopefully they'd also say that I'm a kind person. 優しい人. Or maybe 優しいお父さん. I'm a nice father. What about you? How, if we were introducing ourselves and there was some crazy rule that said you had to use the sentence pattern, what would you do? What would you say about yourself? This will be the last little bit of practice we're doing today. So definitely take the opportunity to try using it if you can. So we have someone else that said they are also using some grammar that we haven't gotten to yet, but saying they're also strange. Kantan is one of those words. It's a bit tricky to use. Kantan is usually used with referring to a difficulty in using something. So you might say this, renshuu is kantan. It's easy to use. Or renshuu is not kantan. Or this smartphone is easy to use. Or this book is a simple book. It's easy to solve. It's easy to read. It's easy to solve the questions. But kantan, with regards to yourself, you probably wouldn't say that. Because you're not really a thing to be used, if that makes sense. And this is a good opportunity to mention a cultural thing that although grammatically a lot of these sentences are correct, some of them you wouldn't use in Japanese, even though they make sense and the information is correct. And I'm going to mention what one person, 5 or 6 sentences up, used. They said, 私は面白いです. I'm interesting. And in many countries and many cultures, that'd be okay to say. You have self-confidence, you mention your good points, not, you don't say too much, but things that you can do, you say, I think I'm a nice person, you would say that. But in Japanese, there's often a sense of you're very self-deferential and you don't mention positive things about yourself. It's not, I'm great at Japanese or I'm, very good with kids kind of thing. And you don't, it's more that you state facts. And other people might say, oh, they're so nice. And you would respond by saying, oh, no, 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 I'm not, which sounds kind of strange. But you don't really push yourself up so much. But hopefully, today's lesson will have helped you out. And before we end things, are there any questions about any of the adjectives that came up or the usages that we had? If not, then I'm going to mention one more thing. I hinted at it earlier, but if you're talking about yourself, one of the things that we mention about ourselves sometimes is our height. I'm tall or I'm short. And interestingly, you cannot use takai or michikai. So if you say I'm short and you say I am mijikai, which is usually the word that's used for, not tall, it doesn't work. So this is a bit more complex, but let me just learn this as a single word. And often you'll see in textbooks that it's taught as a single word, even though there's actual components to it. But let me show you. So if you're talking about someone being tall, yourself or anyone else, you say this. You say seiga takai. And this is for people. Kind of literally, that sei can refer to almost your back. But, it's part of your body, but as a set. And I recommend you learn it as a set. Seiga takai is tall for a person. The opposite of that, if you are, if you're not tall, if you're short, then if I can type it out, you would say seiga hikui. Demi, you're talking about a special version of it, which is definitely not beginner level. It works, and that is more common when it comes before nouns, but it's not something we're going to go into today because it deals with relative clauses and more complex grammar. But that does work. It's excuse me, it's one that comes before nouns, but not after. Seiga hikui or seiga takai can work anywhere. We can drop it in the same way we were dropping in these other adjectives. So hold on to those, and then as you pick up, say no takai or say no hikui, then you can use those as well. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone that came today. This lesson will be available. The video will be available on the Discord as well as inside of renshuu. So if you need to look over things again, you're free to do so. But thank you so much for being here. Whether you participated by putting out sentences or you just, you were there and just listening, taking it all in, we love having you here in whatever form works best for you. We try and keep these as low key and as low stress as we can, and hope to see you here next week. Thank you.